You can't even afford to fix your son's shoes." Claire's voice cut through the cramped kitchen, sharp as glass. She thrust the divorce papers across the table, her hand trembling with contempt. "Sign it. We're over." Marcus Johnson kept his eyes down on his calloused delivery driver's hands. Behind Claire, Trevor Hayes leaned in the doorway, smirking, his expensive suit absurd in this small Cleveland apartment. In the living room, 8-year-old Mason gripped a worn sneaker with a split sole, listening. Then Marcus's phone buzzed silently, deep in his pocket. A private New York number. By sunrise, everything would change. The morning had begun like every other morning on Delmar Street. The apartment smelled of motor oil and instant coffee, the way it always did. Marcus rose before the sun, the way he always did, and he smoothed the cowlick that always rose from the back of his son's head, and he poured cereal into the chipped blue bowl, and he watched the boy eat with the kind of unbroken attention only a father knows how to give. The left sole of Mason's sneaker had split 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had patched it twice with rubber cement and a strip of black electrical tape. Twice the repair had held for a few days before peeling loose again. That morning, the boy walked the 4 blocks to the bus stop with a faint slap following each step down the cracked sidewalk, and a boy named Cooper had laughed and pointed and called him the kind of name an 8-year-old should not yet know existed in the world. 2 other children laughed along. Mason said nothing. He came home quiet. He did not say what had happened. He did not have to. The bruise was not on his knee. It was somewhere a father can only see by watching the way his son sets his backpack down, the way his shoulders fold a little smaller than they had that morning. Marcus watched him climb the steps to their door. Marcus did not push. He had learned over the years that the boy would find the words when he was ready, and not a minute before, that evening, Marcus knelt on the cracked linoleum floor of the kitchen, the broken sneaker turning patiently in his hands. He had the hands of a man who fixed things, broad knuckles, a thin, pale scar across one thumb, fingernails that never quite came clean no matter how hard he scrubbed. He told Mason he would have the shoes good as new by the weekend. He meant it. Mason sat on the kitchen chair watching him, small bare feet swinging, and for the first time that day, there was something almost like a smile beginning at the corner of the boy's mouth. That was the moment Claire walked through the door. She stood in the doorway in her tailored gray coat, her blonde hair pulled back, a leather portfolio under her arm, and she looked at her husband kneeling on the linoleum with a broken child's shoe in his dark, oil-stained hands. Something in her face closed, like a door closing on a room. She had decided never to enter again. She did not say hello. She did not look at Mason. She walked past them both and set her portfolio on the counter with a small, final sound. "We need to talk," she said. Not in front of him, but she said the rest of it in front of him anyway. She sat at the dinner table, the same table where Marcus had helped Mason with his multiplication that afternoon, and she set down a single white envelope and slid it across the surface until it stopped against Marcus's untouched plate. Her voice was flat and rehearsed. "I've already signed. I had it drawn up last week. You can't even afford to fix your son's shoes. Do you understand what that means? He is 8 years old, and his father patches his sneakers with tape and rubber cement, like a man from another century." Marcus did not reach for the envelope. He looked at it for a long moment, then looked at her. In the living room, Mason had gone very still on the couch, the broken sneaker clenched against his chest, and Marcus saw him there, and saw that the boy had heard and felt something tighten beneath his ribs that he kept entirely off his face. Claire did not lower her voice. She accused him of never trying to climb the way other men climbed. She said the word other twice, and the second time something underneath it was unmistakable, and she did not bother to hide it. Marcus did not argue. He did not plead. His eyes moved almost involuntarily toward the door at the back of the apartment that led to the small detached garage. It was an old reflex, and he caught it before it became a glance, and brought his gaze back to his wife before she noticed. Beneath that garage floor, bolted to the concrete under a tarp, and a stack of broken radios, there was a steel safe that Mason had been told never to touch. Marcus had told the boy years ago that it held important papers. That was true as far as it went. Claire pushed her hair back from her face. There was someone else, she said. She wanted Marcus to hear it from her. His name was Trevor Hayes. Trevor built things. Real estate development funds. Trevor was going to do enormous things in this city. Trevor looked at her like she mattered, like she was going somewhere, and she was going somewhere with him. She lifted her chin as she said it, defiant, expecting Marcus to break, expecting the kind of pleading that would give her something to walk away holding. But Marcus gave her nothing to hold. He had known the name before she said it. Trevor Hayes had been circling Claire's company for months. A man who wore his ambition like cheap cologne. Marcus had seen his type 1,000 times in another life. He looked across the table at the woman he had married in a courthouse, with $12 in his pocket, and he felt, beneath the ache, a strange and terrible clarity. He kept his calm, because his calm had been forged in a hospital corridor 9 years in the past, and Claire could not have known that. To her, his stillness read as indifference. "All right," he said. She blinked. "All right? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say?" For just a moment her certainty wavered. Some part of her had wanted the fight. Some part of her had wanted him to plead, because pleading would have proved he still loved her, and she could have walked away with that proof in her hands. But Marcus gave her nothing. The next morning the landlord came to the door. Walter Pruitt was a heavy-set white man in his 60s, who owned half the block and treated his tenants like a debt he resented. He carried a yellow eviction notice in one thick hand, and before he taped it to the door, he made a point of standing in the hallway long enough to be sure Marcus heard every word he had brought with him. The rent was 3 weeks late. Marcus had the money, or could have had it, in 20 minutes with a single phone call. He counted out what was in the coffee can above the refrigerator and came up $60 short, and he asked Pruitt for 2 more days. Pruitt smiled the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment. He let his eyes drift around the small apartment, taking in the second-hand couch and the chipped blue bowl on the kitchen table and the dark-skinned man standing quietly in the doorway. "Men like you," Pruitt said, slow and deliberate, "shouldn't be raising children in a building they can't pay for. Children deserve better than that. This neighborhood deserves better than that." He said the word like a verdict. Mason had come down the stairs in his socks. He stood 3 steps up, gripping the banister, hearing every word. He did not know all of what Pruitt meant. He knew enough. He understood, without anyone explaining it to him, that there was a word for what was happening in that hallway, and that the word had to do with the color of his father's hands. When Pruitt finally taped the notice and walked away down the corridor, Mason did not move from the stairs for a long moment. The lesson arrived without a teacher, the way some lessons always do for boys like him. Wednesday came in gray. Marcus stepped out the front door of the building at 6 in the morning to start his delivery route, and he stopped on the top step and stood very still. The delivery van was at the curb where he had parked it the night before. Both tires on the driver's side had been slashed, the rubber peeled back like dark fruit. The side mirror was on the asphalt in 2 pieces. A long key gouge ran the entire length of the driver's door, and along the side panel, in dripping white spray paint 2 feet high, someone had written a word he had been called twice in his life, and had hoped his son would never have to read. Nothing had been stolen. That was the detail that stayed with him. This was a message. Marcus did not yet have a name for the hand behind it, but he had spent his entire adult life reading the difference between chaos and design, and this had the cold fingerprints of design all over it. A Cleveland police cruiser drifted past the curb, just as he stepped down to look at the damage. Both officers slowed and stared, not at the van, not at the word painted across it, but at the black man crouching beside the slashed tire with a piece of broken glass in his hand. They did not get out. They did not roll down the window. They looked at him the way men look at a problem they are deciding whether to make their own. Then the cruiser rolled on. Marcus did not say anything. He set the piece of glass down and came back with a dustpan and a broom. He swept the asphalt in slow, patient strokes. He did not look at the spray-painted word. He had read it the first time, and reading it once was enough. Mason came down in his socks. He was holding a piece of toast in one hand. He stopped beside the front bumper and looked at the van and at the word on the side, and his small face did something complicated the way a child's face does when he is being introduced to a piece of the world no one had warned him existed. "Daddy," he said quietly. "Is it because I'm brown?" Marcus set down the broom. He turned and looked at his son, and the morning light fell across them both in the colorless way that Cleveland mornings have. Marcus knelt down on the sidewalk so their eyes were level. He took the slice of toast gently from Mason's hand and set it on the curb. He took the boy's small chin between his oil-stained thumb and forefinger and held it lightly, the way he had held 1,000 fragile things in this boy's life. "Listen to me," Marcus said. His voice was low. "There are people in this world who are afraid of what they don't understand, and sometimes when people are afraid, they do ugly things, because ugliness is the only language they know how to speak. That is not about you, son. That has never been about you." Mason swallowed. "But they did it because we're black." "Yes," Marcus said. He did not lie to his son. He had decided years ago that whatever else he gave the boy, he would give him the truth. "Yes, they did it because we're black." Mason nodded slowly. He was 8 years old. He did not understand everything yet, but he understood that his father had not flinched from the answer. "Some things," Marcus said quietly, "once they are lost, you can never get them back. Do you understand that?" Mason did not understand it. Not fully. He nodded anyway, because his father's voice had gone very quiet, and he trusted that voice more than anything in the world. School became a country Mason did not want to live in. Cooper had stopped saying things behind his back. Cooper had moved on to saying them in front of him, in the hallway, on the playground, in the cafeteria where the other children could hear and decide which side of the line they were going to stand on. Some of them looked away. Some of them laughed. A few of the laughers had been Mason's friends the year before, which was the part that hurt the most, the part Mason did not yet have words for. There was a phrase Cooper had taken to using: "Garbage kid." The son of that black man on the news. Cooper's father read the paper aloud at the dinner table, and what the father said the son repeated, and what the son repeated drifted through the hallways of Maplewood Elementary like a smell no one wanted to identify. Mason understood, the way children always understand these things first through their skin, that the adults in his school had heard the phrase too and had decided to let it pass. On a Thursday afternoon, Mason came home with his knuckles scraped and a small dark stain on the front of his shirt that was not his own. He would not say who had started it. He would not say what had been said. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror with his fists in the sink, the water running pink, and waited for his father. Marcus came in quietly and turned off the tap and ran the water again, cold this time. He took his son's small hands in his own large ones and turned them under the stream, examining each knuckle the way he might examine a broken thing he was about to mend. He did not lecture. He did not ask. He understood that there are insults a boy must answer, and that the answering is not always wrong, and that a father who shames his son for the answering only teaches him that some men must take what is given to them. Mason's voice came small. "They said you can't take care of me. They said Mom left because we're poor. They said she left because you're black." Marcus did not stop washing the boy's hands. "What do you think?" Mason was quiet for a long time. "I think you fixed my shoes." "I did fix your shoes, so they're wrong." Marcus dried Mason's hands with a kitchen towel. Slowly, finger by finger, he pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, so they were almost eye to eye, the boy still standing. The man hunched forward, with his elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, Mason. There are two kinds of men in the world. Some men measure another man by what's in his pockets. Some men measure another man by what he would empty his pockets to protect. You're going to meet both kinds your whole life. The ones who measure by pockets, they will look at you and at me, and they will think they know something they do not know. Let them. Some of them will say cruel things. Some of them will say crueler things when they find out you don't break. You don't have to break. But try, son. Try every single day to be the second kind." Mason climbed into his father's lap then, which he had not done in almost a year, since he had decided at 7 that lap-sitting was for babies. Marcus put one arm around him and rested his chin on the top of the boy's head, and the two of them sat that way in the small kitchen with the dripping tap, while outside on Delmar Street, a delivery van, with a spray-painted word along the side panel, sat waiting for tires that had been ordered and had not yet come in. Friday morning, Marcus signed the divorce papers. He did it at 6 o'clock at the kitchen table before Mason woke, with the same pen he used to sign delivery manifests. He did not read the document. There was nothing in it he needed to see. Claire watched from the doorway in her gray coat. When he pushed the signed pages back across the table, she gathered them quickly, almost guiltily, the way a person grabs something before it can be taken back. Trevor was sending a car for her at noon. They would work out Mason. They would work out the rest. She left at noon. A black sedan idled at the curb beside the ruined van, and Claire Reeves slid into a world of leather and quiet and climate control, and did not look back at the window where her son stood watching. The day passed, the way days pass, when something has ended. Marcus finished the second sole of the mended sneaker and set the pair on the counter, good as new, ready for Monday. He made spaghetti for dinner because it was Mason's favorite, read 3 chapters of a book at bedtime, and closed the bedroom door softly. Then, he sat alone at the kitchen table after the apartment had gone quiet. The coffee can sat where it always sat. The mended sneaker lay on the counter. His phone rested face down on the wood beside his cup. At 11 minutes past 10, it began to ring. He knew the number before he turned it over. A private line that fewer than a dozen people on Earth possessed. He had not heard it ring in nearly 2 years. He answered on the third ring. The voice on the other end was crisp and afraid in the controlled way of men who are paid never to sound afraid. It was the chairman of the board of Blackridge Holdings, and he spoke for 90 seconds without interruption. Marcus listened, his eyes on the mended shoe across the room. The Mercer merger, the largest acquisition the firm had ever attempted, $11 billion in motion across 3 continents, was collapsing. The architecture of the entire deal had been Marcus's, designed years ago, and left dormant. Now that it was failing, there was exactly one person alive who understood it well enough to save it. The board had voted. They needed him, not his advice relayed through proxies and white attorneys, as it had been for 2 years. Him, in the room, visible. "You understand what we're asking, Marcus," the chairman said. "You've kept yourself off paper for 11 years. But if you do this, the world is going to find out a black man built Blackridge. The world has never quite been ready for that. You step out from behind us, there's no going back." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Through the thin wall, he could hear his son's slow, even breathing in the next room. He thought of Eleanor, dead 9 years now, who had once told him that the day his son was old enough to know who his father really was would be the day Marcus would finally have to stop hiding. Mason was 8. He had told his son that week to be the second kind of man, and he understood now that he could not say such a thing and not also be it. "I understand," he said. He set the phone down on the table. He sat there in the dark a while longer in the small apartment that smelled of motor oil and instant coffee. The apartment a woman had left that morning, because the man who lived in it would never be somebody. Then he rose, crossed to the doorway of Mason's room, and stood watching the small shape rise and fall beneath the blanket. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "Tomorrow everything changes." By morning, the financial world had its headline, though it did not yet have a face. A formal valuation filed quietly through Blackridge's attorneys before Dawn made it official. The founder of Blackridge Holdings, still unnamed in print, was now recognized as the wealthiest man in the state of Ohio. The number ran across the morning programs, and reporters chased the name behind it and hit the same wall they always hit. And on Delmar Street, the richest man in Ohio made cereal for his son and drove him to school in a borrowed pickup truck. The reveal came 2 weeks later in Chicago. The Sterling Gala was the largest gathering of money in the region, a black-tie evening where a single conversation beside the bar could redirect millions. Trevor Hayes arrived with Claire on his arm in a gown the color of deep wine, and for an hour they were exactly what they had come to be, the city's new power couple. Ascending, photographed, envied. Claire felt for the first time in years that she had arrived. The chandeliers threw light across a sea of people who mattered, and she stood in the middle of it and let herself believe she had finally chosen right. Then something in the room changed. It started near the entrance and moved inward like a current. A turning of heads, a dropping of conversations mid-sentence, A strange electric hush that spread table by table. People were rising to their feet. Not a few people. Hundreds of them. The most powerful figures in 3 states, standing the way a congregation stands. A man had entered in a black suit that fit him like armor worn into battle. He moved without hurry, without any visible awareness of the silence collapsing around him. And the chairman of the largest bank on the floor, a white-haired man who had kept United States senators waiting, crossed the room personally to meet him and shook his hand with both of his own. Claire's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. She knew the walk before she let herself know the face. She knew the set of the shoulders. She knew the way the man carried quiet through a loud room, the way a stone carries weight through water. The wine in her glass trembled. It was Marcus. A microphone had appeared at the front of the hall, and the master of ceremonies was saying something Claire could not hear over the rushing in her own ears. Then Marcus stepped to the podium, and the room held its breath as one body. "For 2 years," Marcus said, and his voice filled the hall without effort. The voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it. "You have been asking who built Blackridge Holdings, who designed the Mercer architecture, who has been sitting behind the curtain while the rest of you guessed." He let the room wait. "My name is Marcus Johnson. I founded Blackridge 11 years ago. I am its principal and its majority owner, and the merger that half the people in this room have staked their year on lives or dies by a decision I will make this week." The hall did not erupt. It did something stranger and more total. It went utterly silent. The silence of several hundred powerful people, simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they knew about a man they had been imagining for 2 years, and had assumed, without quite saying so, was someone who looked like them. Across the room, Trevor Hayes had gone the color of paper. His development fund, the engine of everything he was, had been financed 18 months ago through a chain of intermediaries he had been too arrogant to trace. The capital had come through a holding company, and that company through another, and the trail had vanished into the fog that surrounded Blackridge. He had built his empire, he now understood, on the patient money of the black man whose wife he had taken, the black man he had spoken about in a dozen quiet rooms and language. He would have died to take back. The collapse came the way. Real collapses always come, not with a single blow, but with a slow, surgical withdrawal of the thing that had been holding everything up. The patient capital that financed Trevor's development fund came due, and the intermediaries who had been so accommodating turned suddenly, immovably formal. Lines of credit that had always renewed did not renew. A bank that had been eager became cautious, and then cold. Trevor made call after call, and felt the temperature of the entire industry drop around him. He confronted Marcus once at the Blackridge offices in downtown Cleveland, having talked his way past 2 layers of people who clearly did not want him there. He stood across a wide oak desk Trevor would have killed to sit behind, and he made a speech he had rehearsed in the elevator. "You're destroying me," Trevor said. "Over a woman. You're going to burn down everything I built over a woman who chose me." Marcus regarded him quietly. "I am not destroying anything, Mr. Hayes. I am withdrawing my support. There's a difference, though I understand it does not feel like one from where you're standing." He closed the folder on his desk. "You slashed the tires on a delivery van. You called my landlord and pressured him to put a black child out of his home. You sat in private rooms with men who run this city and spoke about the kind of neighborhoods my son lives in, as though human beings did not live there. You did all of those things because you were certain a man like me could not answer." Marcus's eyes did not move. "I am answering. That is all this is." Trevor opened his mouth and closed it again. Within the week, reporters who had once called Trevor a visionary were calling him overextended, then troubled, then finished. A young journalist at the Plain Dealer had taken the trouble to pull every public quote Trevor had ever given, every transcribed interview, every speech he had made at chambers of commerce. She had found the things he had said about certain zip codes, about certain demographics, about what made one neighborhood worth investing in and another not. She put it all on the front page beside a photograph of him, smiling at a ribbon cutting. The photograph did the work no commentary could. His fund failed publicly 2 weeks later. The reporters who had crowned him forgot him with the same speed they had once celebrated him. which is the only mercy that world reliably offers. He stood on the courthouse steps in front of a row of cameras and tried to project confidence, and projected only a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. Claire watched the whole thing from a condominium downtown that had been bought in Trevor's name and was about to be sold to cover what was left of his creditors. Her own company, which had once valued her, found her name too tangled with the season's largest scandal to keep her near its clients. The distancing was quiet and complete. She had built her life on being associated with rising things, and she learned how quickly that same logic turns when the things begin to fall. But the public verdict was not the wound that mattered to her. The wound that mattered was 8 years old, and a borrowed pickup truck, and a small set of stairs on Delmar Street, and a son who had once run to the door when she came home, and now did not. She came back on a Thursday evening. The van had 4 new tires now, and a fresh coat of paint that had been applied by a body shop 2 days after the gala. The eviction notice was long gone. Walter Pruitt no longer owned the building. She stood in the doorway of the apartment she had fled in a wine-colored gown, dressed now in plain jeans and a sweater, her hair gathered loosely, no makeup. There was no black sedan at the curb. She had taken a bus. She held a small paper bag of groceries against her hip, the way a person holds a peace offering she does not entirely believe in. "I made a mistake," she said. "Marcus, I made a terrible mistake. We were a family. Whatever else happened, we were a family. Mason needs us to be a family again. He needs us together, for him, for Mason." In the next room, Mason had gone very still on the couch. He was holding a library book about a planet he had been reading about for school. He had stopped reading the planet 2 minutes before. He had heard her voice from the hallway. He was 8 years old, and he was listening the way he had listened on the night this had all begun. Marcus set the wrench he had been holding down on the kitchen towel, folded across the counter. He did not invite her in. He did not close the door. "You didn't leave me when I was poor, Claire." His voice was not cruel. That was the worst of it for her. There was no cruelty in it at all. "I could have forgiven that. People are afraid of being poor. I understand fear better than you know." She opened her mouth. "You left me," he said. "The moment you decided a black man with oil on his hands had nothing in him worth keeping. That is the moment I cannot undo. You looked at the man who fixed your son's shoes, and you saw a small life and a smaller future, and you saw nothing of value in either. Nothing I am now changes what you saw then. The money does not undo it, it only proves it." Her face crumpled. "That isn't fair." "No," Marcus agreed. "Almost none of this has been fair. You should know that better than most." She stood in the hallway a long moment. She tried to see past Marcus into the living room. She could see only the edge of the couch and the corner of the library book lying open on the cushion. She wanted, more than anything she had ever wanted, for her son to come around the corner and into the doorway. He did not. When she finally turned and walked back down the hallway, Mason did not move. He did not stand. He did not call out to her. He did not say goodbye. He listened to her footsteps down the stairs and across the front walk and out to the curb, and he stayed where he was on the couch, with the library book open in his lap. That silence, the small, clean silence of an 8-year-old who had decided not to choose her, was the thing that broke her heart in a way the cameras and the columns and the canceled accounts had not. Because trust like that, once a child decides he no longer has it for you, is not a thing a person can rebuild on any schedule the world will permit. A week later, on a soft autumn evening, Mason came out and sat down on the back step that led to the small garage off the rear of the apartment. He was turning the old mended sneaker over in his hands the way Marcus himself turned broken things. The new shoes were in the closet upstairs. He had taken these out of the box because he had wanted them. Marcus found him there and sat down beside him on the step. They sat in silence for a while. The September air smelled of leaves. "Dad," Mason said without looking up, "can I ask you something? And you tell me the true answer?" "Always. If you were rich the whole time, if you were the man on the news, the richest man in the state, why did we live like this?" The boy struggled with the question, the way he struggled, with the questions that were too big for the words he had. "Why didn't I get good shoes? Why did Mom think we were poor? Why didn't you just show her, and she would have stayed? It was the question Marcus had dreaded for years, because the clean answer required him to open a room he had kept locked since a hospital corridor 9 years gone. He looked out at the small dark yard. Then he reached over and took the sneaker gently from his son's hands, the way he had taken it on the night this all began. "Your mother," Marcus said quietly. "Your real mother, Eleanor. I have not told you much about her." Mason went very still. "She married me when I was a different man than the one you know. I was building Blackridge then, and I was good at it. I was in every important room. I was never home. And the men I did business with, the kind of men who measure people by how useful they are, when they could not reach me, they reached for the things I loved." He turned the sneaker slowly in his hands. "They used your mother. They never let her be a person in those rooms. They saw a black woman married to a black man who had walked into their world without permission, and they saw a way to push back. They said things to her, and they said things about her, and the pressure on her did not stop. Not for 1 year. Not for 2. He went very still. She got sick, and even then they did not stop. I sat in a hospital corridor at the end of it, and I understood that I had built a thing that ate the people I loved. So the week after we buried her, I took you. You were a baby, and I walked away from all of it." He set the shoe down between them. "I ran Blackridge through other people, white men mostly, in suits that fit them right, who could walk into any room without being asked twice. I brought you here and bought us a small life, because I had seen what the big one does to the people inside it. I wanted you to grow up knowing what a man is actually worth before anyone ever told you what he was worth on paper." He looked at his son. "And your mother, Claire. I hope she had married the delivery driver because she wanted him. When she found out that she had not, she had already shown me which man she had been waiting for all along. I could not have shown her the truth to keep her son. The truth was the one thing that was always going to send her away." Mason was crying now, silently, the way children cry when they have been trusted with something too heavy. He leaned against his father's side. Marcus put an arm around him, and they sat together on the step in the soft dark, while something inside the small frame slowly unclenched. "I'm glad you fixed my shoes," Mason said finally. "So am I," said Marcus. What Marcus did with the months that followed told the city more about him than any interview. He started a foundation in Eleanor's name, the Eleanor Johnson Fund, a scholarship for the children of working families on the east side of Cleveland, children who walked to bus stops with split souls, who came home with the wrong words ringing in their ears. The first 100 scholarships went out before most people even knew the fund existed. He did not put his own name on it. He put hers. Then he bought the block. He bought the building he had almost been evicted from, and the 3 around it. Every tenant was assured no rent would rise. Walter Pruitt, who had taped a yellow notice to a struggling man's door, found himself selling to that same struggling man and retiring on the proceeds. The families who lived there, the ones Trevor Hayes would have cleared out for something tall and glass, stayed. Their rent stayed. The block became, quietly, one of the safest places to be working class in the city of Cleveland. Trevor never recovered. A federal review turned up the kinds of things such reviews turn up when a man has been more concerned with appearing successful than with being solvent. He left Cleveland eventually for a smaller city, and the columns that had crowned him forgot him. Claire tried, in the slow and stumbling way of someone who has finally understood the size of a thing too late. She never asked Marcus for money. She asked only for time with Mason, and Marcus gave it, because the boy had known her as his mother for nearly all of his life, and Marcus would not be the man who took her from him out of spite. He had watched what spite did to families, but the thing between Claire and Mason did not mend the way she needed it to. The boy was polite, sometimes kind, but the unguarded trust that had once flowed toward her was gone, and it did not come back, because trust like that is not a thing rebuilt on a schedule. A year passed. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Marcus stood at the edge of a blacktop court behind Mason's school. Mason had grown an inch over the winter. He was laughing more easily now than he had in the dark months after the gala. His shoes were good ones. Marcus had noticed that the boy still kept the old mended pair in his closet, tucked behind the new ones, and would not let them be thrown away. And Marcus did not ask why. He already knew. Another parent drifted over to the fence beside him. The man glanced sideways, taking in the unremarkable jacket, and something clicked. "Hey," the man said, half disbelieving. "You're him, aren't you? The Blackridge guy, the billionaire." He gave a short, awkward laugh. "What are you doing at a grade school basketball game? You're really that guy?" Marcus watched his son sink a shot. Mason turned and looked for his father at the fence, the way children check that the one person who matters is still there. And Mason found him, and grinned, and pointed at the hoop in promise of another shot. Marcus raised a hand and called back that he was watching, that he was always watching. Then Marcus turned to the stranger, and a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No," he said, "I'm just a father trying to do right by his son." The man started to say something else, but Marcus had already turned back to the court, his whole attention given over to the boy in the good shoes who had once worn taped-up ones. The strongest man is not the one the world finally sees. He is the one who kept a tender heart while the world refused to.